She wrote help on the napkin the mafia boss at table 12 noticed before the waiter. Mariner's Reach was a city that drowned its secrets in salt water and dressed them in neon. It was a Thursday night, and the autumn rain came in hard off the Atlantic, a cold, stinging spray that lashed against the panoramic windows of the Edelweiss room. This place was a glass sanctuary, perched high above the marina. Down below, the yachts of the insulated wealthy bobbed in the dark, their masts clinking like restless ghosts. Inside, there was only the low hum of civilized conversation and the discreet clink of heavy silver on porcelain. My name is Elena Miles. By day, I'm a piano tutor, my fingers navigating the complex architectures of Bach and Debussy for children whose parents paid for the prestige, not the passion, by night. I was this, a crisp white apron, a silent smile, and the muscle memory of balancing trays of food I could never afford. I was here, serving the elite of Mariner's Reach, because I was owned. I was owned by the North Atlantic Cultural Council. It sounded noble, a patron of the arts. They had funded my final 2 years at the conservatory, a scholarship that had felt like a miracle. But the miracle came with fine print, and the fine print had teeth. The debt was staggering, the repayment terms impossible. The council, I learned too late, was just a polite name for a ledger, and they always collected. Derek Lorne, the floor manager and my immediate handler, cornered me by the gleaming chrome of the service station. His smile was thin, painted on, and it never reached his eyes. "Elena," he murmured, his voice a slick monotone. He slid a clipboard onto the marble counter. A single sheet of paper was affixed to it. "A small addendum to your work agreement for our VIP clients." I read the header, Scholarflex Registry, VIP Servicing Addendum. My fingers went numb. I read the clauses. Discretionary availability, personalized engagement, hostess duties as required by donor. This wasn't a work agreement. This was a leash. "The gentlemen from the Gray Harbor Combine are here tonight," Lorne said, his gaze flicking to a table near the glass. "They are significant donors to the council. They specifically requested you serve their table." I looked. 2 men in identical, ill-fitting gray suits. They weren't admiring the view of the stormy marina. They were watching me. Their eyes were flat, assessing. The way a man assesses livestock at auction. They were calculating my worth. "I don't understand," I whispered, though I understood perfectly. "You understand this," Lorne said, his voice hardening. He tapped the paper. "The council has activated your community placement clause. This signature just formalizes the arrangement. I need it before you take them their first round of drinks." He turned away then, distracted by a wealthy couple signaling for their check. His back was to me. I had maybe 10 seconds. My hand dove into the pocket of my apron, fingers closing around the cheap ballpoint pen we used for order checks. I pulled a fresh linen napkin from the stack. It was thick, creamy, expensive. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely form the letters. HELP. It wasn't a plea. It was a scream compressed into 4 letters. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. My heart was a broken metronome, erratic and loud in my chest, a frantic bird battering itself against my ribs. I placed the napkin on the edge of the service counter, just visible past the stack of polished side plates, praying that a guest, a busboy, anyone would see it before Lorne returned. My gaze swept the room in panic and landed on table 12. Table 12 was the best seat in the house, a curved booth of dark red leather that commanded the entire room and the marina view. It was occupied by Silas Valerio. Everyone in this city knew that name. He was the unspoken power, the head of the Valerio Syndicate, an empire built on the bones of the old shipping yards. The whispers said he was a different kind of monster. Principled. They said the syndicate had its own code, one that forbade narcotics and, above all, forbade violence against civilians or the weak. He was there with 3 other men, all in dark, perfectly tailored suits, their faces calm, their voices too low to carry. They were the picture of quiet power. Lorne was still occupied. His back turned. In that precise, agonizing moment, the geometry of the room shifted. A clean, unobstructed line of sight formed between my small, desperate napkin and the man at table 12. Silas Valerio looked up. His eyes were not idle. They were constantly scanning, assessing, measuring. They moved past the gray suits, past the oblivious diners, and settled on my station. He saw the napkin. He did not react. There was no gasp, no frown, no sudden movement. He simply registered the word. He processed it. Then his gaze lifted, moving from the 4 letters on the linen to my face. He saw me. He saw the terror I was trying to lock behind my teeth. He saw the 2 men in gray suits, the Gray Harbor Combine, watching me like wolves. He saw Derek Lorne turning back toward me, his face impatient, his hand out for the signed clipboard. Silas Valerio made the smallest of motions. He tapped a single finger on the table. The man to his left, a mountain named Milo Sardi, who served as his shadow, did not even turn his head. But his entire body shifted, a subtle tightening of the shoulders. He went from at rest to ready. My hand was trembling so hard I jammed it behind my back. Clutching my own wrist, I raised my chin. I would not let them see me break. Silas Valerio stood up. The motion was fluid, economical, and utterly commanding. The low hum of the restaurant did not stop, but a pocket of silence seemed to form around him. He picked up his own heavy napkin and, in a gesture of classic, old-world formality, draped it over his forearm. He began to walk, not toward the restrooms, not toward the exit, but directly toward me. He stopped at my station, a physical barrier between me and the rest of the room. He was close enough that I could smell the clean scent of expensive wool and something sharp, like the sea air after a storm. Derek Lorne froze, his mouth opening in annoyance at the interruption. Silas's voice was a low, quiet rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. He looked only at me. "Excuse me," he said. "I believe I'd like to see the wine menu again." It was polite. It was plausible. A simple request from a discerning customer, but I saw what no one else did. His shoulders were squared, a shield. His chin was lowered, his gaze intense, focused entirely on me, locking me in place and shutting the rest of the world out. He was publicly, silently shielding me. He didn't need to touch the napkin with the word help written on it. He didn't need to acknowledge it. By standing there, by looking at me with those dark, assessing eyes, he had already answered. He was waiting for me to play my part. I retrieved the wine list, my hands steady only through sheer, terrified practice. Derek Lorne watched me, his eyes dead. Silas Valerio did not return to his table. Instead, he gestured to the small, unoccupied service table across from my station, a table usually reserved for decanting. "May I?" he asked Lorne, his tone that of a man inconvenienced. "The lighting at my table is casting a shadow on the page." It was a ridiculous complaint. The lighting in the Edelweiss room was meticulously designed, costing tens of thousands of dollars to ensure there were no shadows. But Derek Lorne, faced with the quiet gravity of Silas Valerio, could only manage a twitching, obsequious nod. "Of course, Mr. Valerio, whatever you require." Silas sat. I remained standing. We were now opposite each other, separated by a tiny circle of polished mahogany. Me in my server's apron, him in his fortress of tailored wool. He looked, for all the world, like a demanding particular guest about to grill me on vintages. Milo Sardi, the broad-shouldered man who had been at his table, had moved. He now stood near Derek, ostensibly waiting for his boss's order, but his position was precise. He blocked Derek's view of the floor beneath our table. As Lorne nervously scanned the dining room, Milo bent slightly, as if to adjust his shoe, unseen by anyone but me. His hand emerged from his cuff, placing a thin, black smartphone flat against the table's heavy pedestal, its microphone aimed perfectly at Derek. Silas opened the wine list, his eyes scanning the page. "Speak," he said, his voice a low command meant only for me. Quietly. "What is it?" My voice was a dry rasp. I kept my eyes deferential, looking at the table. The scholarship from the North Atlantic Cultural Council? It wasn't a scholarship, it's debt. The company that manages it is called ScholarFlex Registry. What kind of debt? His eyes never left the list. They funded my last 2 years at the conservatory. Now they say I owe them service. Hours. They just gave me this. I gave the slightest nod toward the clipboard Lorne was still holding. The VIP addendum. They want me to serve the men at that table. The Gray Harbor Combine. They're donors. They're forcing you. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. If I refuse, they seize my assets. They ruin my credentials. They told me they own my conservatory degree. I can't teach. I can't work. Who is the collector? I get texts. A man. His name is Kellen Dre. He runs some big tech charity, the Providence Gate Foundation. Dre. He said the name as if tasting something sour. Phone number. I recited it from memory, the number that haunted my nights. He didn't write it down. He just nodded, once, his jaw tightening. This was the exchange. It was quick, cold, and transactional. He was not offering comfort, he was acquiring targets. I saw movement at the edge of my vision. The two men in the gray suits had gotten up from their table. They were lumbering toward us, their expressions impatient. They sensed they were losing their new acquisition. Derek Lorne cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. Mr. Valerio, if you have decided on a wine, perhaps Miss Miles can retrieve it, the gentleman. Silas raised a single hand, a quiet gesture that silenced Lorne instantly. He did not look at the approaching men. His eyes finally lifted from the menu and met mine. He reached across the small table, his fingers brushing the heavy linen napkin, the one with my plea. He didn't crumple it and he didn't hide it. He folded it once, twice, with meticulous care, trapping the word help inside the fabric. Then he slid it into the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. It felt like a key turning in a lock. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. In the Valerio Syndicate, a request given and accepted was rumored to be a binding oath. He had just taken my terror and put it next to his heart. The gray suits were 5 feet away. Silas, a new voice, booming and cheerful. The maitre d', who I knew was actually the head chef and owner. A man named Tio bustled over, wiping his hands on a pristine white apron. A pleasure. As always, is the sea bass to your liking this evening. Tio owed his restaurant to a Valerio loan, a story whispered in the kitchens. The banks had refused him 20 years ago. Silas Valerio's father had not. The Edelweiss room was, and always would be, safe harbor. Silas afforded the chef a brief, thin smile. He didn't answer the question about the fish. Instead, he lifted his water glass and tapped his ring finger against the crystal. 3 distinct, quiet taps. Tap, tap, tap. It was a signal. Tio's jovial expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. He nodded. Ah, the reserve list, of course. You are looking for something special. Allow me. Tio turned and walked, not to the main wine cellar, but to the discreet, wood-paneled staff door leading to the kitchen corridor. He propped it open, as if waiting for a busboy. Silas stood. The entire sequence, from the tap to the open door, took less than 12 seconds. The Chateau 98 Cabernet, Silas said to me, his voice now loud enough for the room to hear. I believe you keep it in the rear cellar. Please, show me. He didn't grab me. He didn't pull. He offered his arm. My hand was shaking, but I placed it on the sleeve of his suit. It was like touching marble. We walked. We walked straight past the 2 gray-suited men, who looked utterly baffled. Excuse me, one of them started, his voice a gravelly monotone. He put a hand out to block us. Milo Sardi stepped directly into his path. Milo was a very large man, but his voice was shockingly polite. Gentlemen, Mr. Valerio is consulting on the wine. I'm sure you wouldn't want to interrupt his dinner. Milo's politeness was a brick wall. He didn't threaten. He simply occupied the space, smiling pleasantly while the gray suits realized they could not get past him without starting a war in the most expensive restaurant in Mariner's Reach. Silas and I did not look back. We slipped through the staff door into the warm, golden-lit service corridor. The clatter of the kitchen was ahead, the muffled dining room behind us. We were out. He guided me through the maze of stainless steel and steam, past cooks and dishwashers who kept their heads down, their eyes averted. He knew the building's arteries. He pushed open a heavy rear fire exit, and we were suddenly in the concrete chill of the subterranean parking garage. The air smelled of cold cement and damp. "My coat," I whispered. "The first thing I could think of. My purse." "They are replaceable," he said, his voice flat. He steered me toward a black sedan that looked like polished obsidian, so dark it seemed to drink the dim light. I fumbled in my apron pocket for my phone. My only possession. It was vibrating, a frantic, buzzing panic against my hip. I ripped it out. The screen was lit up with 7 missed calls and a string of texts. "Nora, my best friend, my roommate." "Elena, where are you?" "A letter just came, taped to our door. It's from something called the Coastal Merit Authority. It's an immediate compliance inspection." "Elena, they say they're coming tonight to our apartment, and they're saying they have a writ to assess collateral assets for your ScholarFlex contract." My blood turned to ice. "They're going to my apartment. They're going to clean me out." Silas stopped, his hand on the car door. He read the texts over my shoulder. "They are fast," he said, a note of grim respect in his voice. "The authority is a shell, a phantom agency. They use it to legally seize property under maritime law. It's how they enforce the contracts." "I have to go home," I said, panic rising. "Nora's there alone." "You will not," he said. It was an absolute command. "They are not there for your furniture. They are there for you. We go to Port Laureate, my territory. You will be safe there." I hesitated. My apartment, my friend, fleeing with a man I'd met 10 minutes ago, a man whose reputation was built on quiet violence. Was I trading one cage for another? A sound echoed from the stairwell we had just left, the heavy, unmistakable thud of cheap dress shoes on concrete. One of the gray-suited men appeared at the top of the ramp, squinting into the dim light. He saw us. He didn't shout. He just reached, slowly, deliberately, to the small of his back, his hand slipping under his oversized gray jacket. He was reaching for a weapon. That decided it. I lunged for the car door. Silas already had it open. I threw myself inside, landing on leather so soft it felt like water. He was in the driver's seat a second later, the engine turning over with a silent, powerful hum. The car doors locked with a heavy, final thunk. Silas put the car in gear. He did not look at the man on the ramp. He only looked at me, his eyes dark in the shadows of the garage. "From the moment you wrote that word," he said, his voice quiet against the sound of the engine, "this became my business." Port Laureate was not a harbor of shining yachts. It was the city's old heart, smelling of diesel, salt, and wet iron. The streets were narrow, the brick buildings huddled close. Silas drove the black sedan into a subterranean garage beneath an unassuming brick building, its entrance marked only by a small, unlit sign, the Arc Light. Inside was a different world. It was a jazz club, but silent. It was hours from opening. The lights were low, illuminating polished dark wood, brass fixtures, and the ghosts of last night's cigar smoke. Milo Sardi was already there, as was a woman who rose from a booth as we entered. She was sharp, dressed in a lawyer's pinstripe suit, but her eyes were tired and relentlessly intelligent. "This is her," Silas said. It was an introduction and an order. "Tessa Quinn," the woman said, shaking my hand, and her grip was firm, her skin cold. "I handled the Valerio Syndicate's civil and corporate affairs, which, tonight, it seems you have become." She led us to a back room, a private office that looked more like a war room. A massive corkboard dominated one wall, already covered in corporate charts. "Nora is safe," Silas said, answering my unspoken question as he handed me a bottle of water. "Milo spoke with her. She's on her way to a secure location. The compliance inspection found an empty apartment. Relief made me weak at the knees. I sank into a chair. "Let's begin," Tessa said, all business. She picked up a marker. "You said Scholarflex Registry. You mentioned the North Atlantic Cultural Council? You named Kellen Dre?" She began to draw lines on the board, a spiderweb of shell corporations. This is a classic debt for servitude model, but it's surgically clean. The council gives the scholarship. You default on the obscure repayment terms. The debt is then sold for pennies on the dollar to a private servicer, Scholarflex. "But they're connected," I insisted. "Lorne, the manager at the Edelweiss. He knew about the donors. He worked for Scholarflex." "Exactly," Tessa said, her marker striking the board. "The council, Scholarflex, and Dre's primary slush fund, the Mariner Endowment, all share a board of directors. Dre isn't just the collector. He's the architect. He's running a high-class trafficking ring disguised as philanthropy." "And the Coastal Merit Authority?" I asked, my voice shaking as I remembered the notice taped to my door. "That's his hammer," Tessa said, drawing a final, heavy line. "A quasi-public agency created by a city ordinance. It has the power to seize maritime assets, which they've legally stretched to include any human asset developed through coastal funding. That's you. The artist, they use the authority to provide the legal muscle, the compulsory internships that Lorne was trying to force you into. He's using a city agency to enforce his private slave contracts," Silas murmured, his voice a low growl. "I have the emails," I said, suddenly energized. "The threats, the repayment schedule, the welcome packet from the council." I pulled out my phone. For the next hour, I forwarded every message, every PDF, every veiled threat I had received for the last 2 years. Tessa filtered them on a laptop, her fingers flying. She sorted them into folders, her face grim. "This is good," she said. "He's arrogant. He put the quiet parts in writing. I can build a case with this." She paused. "I will also sanitize it, remove any mention of Mr. Valerio's involvement. If this goes public, it must be clean." Silas had been silent, watching the web grow on the board. He finally turned to Milo. "The Argo cell. I want them to run a full financial trace on Kellen Dre. Specifically, every donation his Providence Gate Foundation has made to the city council members who sponsored the Coastal Merit Authority's charter. I want to know who he owns." Milo nodded and vanished from the room. My phone rang. It was Nora, her voice tinny and scared but defiant. "Elena, you okay? That big guy, Milo, he got me out. I'm in a hotel. It's nice, but I'm okay. Nora, I'm safe." "Listen," she said, her voice dropping. "That thing you signed, I almost did. Remember last spring, the artist support grant? It was them, the same language. North Atlantic Cultural Council. I was 2 days from signing, but my uncle, the accountant, he said the interest structure was predatory. He told me to run. Elena, I never told you because I was embarrassed I almost fell for it. This isn't your fault. It's a trap. A smart one." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you, Nora." I hung up and looked at Silas. I felt a sliver of my own backbone re-emerge. This was not my failure. This was his crime. Rain lashed against the office window, the sound a steady drum against the tense silence. Silas was watching me, his expression unreadable. "They have your friend," he said. "They have your apartment. They have your signature. The Gray Harbor Combine is involved, which means Dre is looking for investors in his new assets. That's what tonight was. A private auction." He stepped closer. "I can make this stop. I can move you to another city, give you a new name, a new life. You will be safe. You will be protected. You will never have to see these men again." It was a simple offer, a clean break, an escape. The fear in me screamed to take it, to run and never look back. "Or," I asked, because his tone implied a second choice. His eyes darkened. "Or we take everything back from him, his reputation, his money, his public standing. We burn the entire structure to the ground." I looked at the spider web on the wall. I thought of the conservatory, the hours of practice, the dream he had twisted into this nightmare. I thought of the other students, the other artists, who must be trapped in this. "You want to be protected," he asked, "or do you want to take everything back?" I stood up, my gaze level with his. "Both," I said, "but we do it by my rules." A flicker of something surprise, respect passed through his eyes. "Go on." "He's arrogant," I said, echoing Tessa. "He hides in plain sight, his charity, the Providence Gate Foundation. That's his armor. That's where we hit him." Tessa was already typing. Their annual gala is in 2 days, at the Crown of Astor Hotel. It's the biggest philanthropy event of the season in Mariner's Reach. "He'll be there," I said. "He'll be giving speeches about empowering young artists. The hypocrisy. It's the perfect stage." "A stage for what?" Silas asked. "For me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "He thinks I'm a pianist, an asset. I will be his guest performer. I'll go to him. I'll play at his gala." Tessa looked at Silas, skeptical. "Mr. Valerio, that is an extreme risk. She would be walking directly into his fortress." "She would not be going alone," Silas said. His gaze fixed on me. He understood. This was not about hiding. This was about defiance. "Valerio will need an escape route," Milo said, returning to the room. "The Crown of Astor backs onto the old Halcyon boatyards. The roof line connects to the rigging lofts. We can secure a path, high ground, clear exit." "Good," Silas said. "Elena," he turned to me, "if you go in there, you will be his asset again. If only for an hour, he will control the room, the stage, the microphone." "Then we control the microphone," I said. Tessa caught my meaning instantly. "A chip. We can embed a high-fidelity transmitter into a lapel mic, something that looks standard for a performance." "He'll be in the wings," I said, the plan forming, my heart racing with a new, cold purpose. "He'll come to congratulate his star pupil. He'll threaten me, and he'll do it right next to a live mic." "The Argo cell can monitor the feed," Milo added. "We'll have a team in the hotel's technical bay." The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. The thought of being near Dre, of being under his control, made my skin crawl. But sitting here, practicing with a tiny, sophisticated piece of espionage equipment, I felt a different kind of power. Silas watched me clip the microphone to my blouse. He showed me how to shield it with my hand, how to turn my body to maximize its range. He was not giving orders. He was not telling me what to do. He was standing just behind me, his presence a solid, steady weight in the room. He was giving me the tools. The choice had already been mine. The Crown of Astor Hotel was a monument to Mariner's Reach's new money. The ballroom was an obscene cavern of polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and towering floral arrangements that cost more than my annual salary. String music, thin and polite, drifted over the murmur of the city's elite. Flashbulbs popped with a relentless, blinding rhythm. The city's press capturing philanthropy as a spectator sport. I was backstage, in a small, suffocatingly warm logistics room, waiting. My fingers, cold as ice, rested on the keys of a grand piano that had been rolled onto the stage. Through the gap in the heavy curtain, I could see Kellen Dre at the podium. He was bathed in a warm, purple spotlight, his face a mask of benevolent sincerity. "And that is why the Providence Gate Foundation," he said, his voice amplified, dripping with false humility, "is not just about funding. It's about empowering. It's about giving our city's brightest young artists the wings they need to fly, free from the constraints of debt, free to create." The applause was loud, a wave of self-congratulation. I felt sick. My microphone, in a tiny black dot clipped to the silk of the borrowed dress, felt like a burning coal against my skin. My cue came. I was introduced as one of our brightest success stories, the extraordinarily talented Elena Miles. I walked out onto the stage. The light was blinding. Hundreds of faces, blurred and indistinct, turned toward me. I sat at the piano. My hands were shaking again, but I knew what to do with shaking hands. I placed them on the keys. the familiar territory of ivory and ebony, and I began. I played Debussy's Clair de Lune. I played it with all the technical precision I possessed, letting the familiar, haunting melody fill the grand room. It was a shield. I focused on the notes, on the rise and fall of the dynamics, and shut out the faces, the room, the lie. In a hotel suite 10 floors above, I knew Tessa and Milo were at work. They were dressed for the party, 2 new high rollers making a splash, their entry secured by a 5-figure donation to Providence Gate. From their room, the Argo cell, Valerio's unseen tech team was waging a silent war. As I played the final, shimmering chords of the Debussy, I transitioned. I did not pause for applause. I moved directly into a short, jarring piece of my own composition. It was only 90 seconds long, a frantic, dissonant melody full of complex rhythms and sharp, staccato bursts. The audience shifted, uncomfortable. This was not the pretty music they had come for, but it wasn't for them. The piece was a key. Its unique sequence of high and low-density notation was a digital skeleton key, broadcast by my microphone. In the suite above, the Argo cell used the corresponding signal burst to bypass the encryption on Kellen Dre's private cloud. They were in. As my fingers flew across the keys, they were downloading the real ledgers, the contracts, the lists of other artists trapped in his web. I finished. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by polite, confused applause. I stood, bowed, and walked off the stage, back into the dimness of the logistics room. Kellen Dre was waiting for me. The benevolent mask was gone. His face was flushed with anger. "What was that?" he hissed. Grabbing my arm, his fingers dug into my bicep. "That noise. You were supposed to be charming." "It was a contemporary piece," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The microphone was live. "It was garbage," he snapped. "You're here to be an asset, Miss Miles. A charming, talented, grateful asset. You exist tonight to make my donors feel good about their investment." He pulled me further into the room, away from the stagehands. "And speaking of investments, your 2-day grace period is over. You will sign the contract extension tonight. Or I swear to God, you'll be on the compulsory list by morning. You'll be serving the Gray Harbor Combine on their private yacht, and you will not be serving them champagne." "That wasn't our agreement," I said, my heart hammering. "That was your scholarship." He sneered. "This is the reality. You are collateral, Elena, a secured asset, and your loan has been called." "Could you repeat that in contractual language?" The new voice was calm, polite, and cut through Dre's tirade like a chilled steel blade. Silas Valerio stood in the doorway. He was not dressed as a guard. He was a guest, impeccable in a black tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. He looked as if he had simply taken a wrong turn on his way to the bar. Dre's hand flew off my arm. His face went pale. "Valerio, I didn't know you were a supporter of the arts." "I support clear contracts," Silas said, taking a slow, deliberate step into the room. "And I believe I just heard you threaten a compulsory seizure of an asset. That sounds complicated. Legally." Dre forced a laugh. "You misunderstood. A private matter. A mentorship disagreement." "We call it a public-private partnership," Dre said, his arrogance returning as he tried to find common ground with a man he clearly, wrongly, assumed was a fellow predator. A mechanism for ensuring our investments in the arts, of course, provide a significant return. The city council understands. The coastal authority provides the structure. He was boasting. He was confessing. A camera flash popped, but this one was different. It came from the doorway. A small press team, 2 people in lanyards I didn't recognize, was filming. "Is that on the record, Mr. Dre?" the woman holding the camera asked. Dre's face turned to thunder. "Who the hell are you, security? Get them out!" At that exact moment, the lights in the ballroom flickered, once, twice. Then the entire backstage area went dark. plunged into blackness except for the emergency exit signs. A muffled shout came from the ballroom. "They're hitting the tech room," Silas said, his voice a low command in the dark. He didn't grab me, and he took my hand. "The Combine. They're after the hard drive. We're not using the stairs." He pulled me toward a heavy steel door I hadn't noticed. One marked Rooftop Access, a service stairwell. We took the stairs 2 at a time, the concrete echoing our footsteps. I could hear other, heavier feet pounding up from below, a chase. We burst through the final door onto the roof of the Crown of Astor. The wind hit me like a physical blow, cold and wet with sea spray. The city was a galaxy of lights below us. The noise of the gala was gone, replaced by the howl of the wind off the Halcyon boatyards. I was shaking, the adrenaline and the cold warring for control. Silas immediately shrugged out of his tuxedo jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders. It was heavy and warm from his body. We stood for a second, the wind tearing at my hair, our eyes locked in that silent, windswept moment. He didn't need to say a word. He was here. A figure scrambled up from the access door behind us. It was one of the gray-suited men from the Edelweiss room, his face a mask of fury. Before I could even scream, Milo Sardi stepped out from behind a massive air conditioning unit. He moved with a speed that was terrifying for a man his size. He didn't use a gun. He met the man's charge, used his momentum against him, and in 2 swift, brutal movements, had the man face down on the gravel roof. His arm wrenched behind his back. I heard the sharp zzz-ip of a heavy-duty zip tie being pulled tight. Silas didn't even watch. He was already steering me toward the steel gantry that led to the old rigging lofts of the boatyard, our escape route. "Dre," I managed to ask, shouting over the wind. "He'll escape," Silas said, his voice tight. "The Combine's diversion will cover him." He pointed. Down in the service alley, a black car was peeling out, its tires screaming. But they left something behind. Milo joined us, holding a slim, brushed aluminum briefcase. From the tech room, boss. The Combine was after this, but the Argo team swapped it. Silas took it. "Dre's software key, the master ledger." He stared out at the dark, churning water of the marina, his face like stone. "It's over?" I asked. He looked at me, the wind whipping his dark hair. "No, the game just moved from money to law." The city was a raw nerve, vibrating with the aftermath of the gala, but another, greater anxiety had gripped Mariner's Reach, the weather alerts. A level 3 hurricane named Ophion was churning up the coast, expected to make landfall within 36 hours. The sky was already a bruised, sickly yellow. Silas did not take me back to the arc light. We drove, the city's panic-driven traffic fading behind us, replaced by the winding, empty roads of the coastal range. We climbed into the North Spur Ridge, a dense forest of pine and cedar that loomed over the city. The air grew colder, cleaner. We arrived at a place called Cedarlane. It was not a safe house. It was a lodge, built of massive, dark logs. It sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, which was already showing whitecaps even from this distance. Silas called it neutral territory, a place where syndicate business was forbidden. "Milo will stay on the perimeter," Silas said as we entered. "The Combine will be disorganized, but Dre will be desperate." The inside was simple, dominated by a cold stone fireplace and heavy, comfortable furniture. It was quiet. The quiet was unsettling. My phone vibrated. It was Nora. "Okay, I'm at the new spot. Your friend Tessa set it up. I just posted on my social media that I'm heading out of town for a surprise dance retreat. Tagged myself in the wrong state. That should buy us some time." "Right." It's perfect, Nora. Stay safe." "You too," she said, her voice small. "Don't trust him too much. Elena." I hung up as Silas came in from the kitchen. He had shed his tuxedo and was in a simple gray Henley, the fabric pulling across his shoulders. He looked less like a crime boss and more like the caretaker of this empty lodge. I saw it then, the side of him that no one wrote about in the papers. The overhead light in the small kitchen flickered and died. I expected him to make a call, to summon someone. Instead, He opened a utility closet, pulled out a new bulb, and wordlessly retrieved a step stool. I watched him balance, his focus entirely on the simple, mechanical task of changing a light bulb. Later, Milo came in from the cold, a long, bloody scratch on his forearm from the scuffle on the rooftop. I saw Silas motion him to the kitchen table. Silas didn't bark an order. He retrieved a first aid kit, cleaned the wound with an efficient, practiced hand, and bandaged it himself. He was a leader who knew how to do the small things. But the control was always there. I felt the air in the lodge grow stuffy and went to open a window, needing to smell the pine and the coming storm. Before the latch was undone, his voice stopped me. "Leave it." "It's suffocating in here," I argued, turning to face him. "The security protocol for this house requires a sealed perimeter. The window stays locked." "I am not a prisoner. Silas, I am a partner in this, and I need air. I need an open window." We stared at each other, a silent battle over a 2-foot pane of glass. It was about the schedule he wanted to lock, and the freedom I needed to breathe. Finally, with a sigh of irritation, he nodded. 10 minutes, then it is locked." It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. The real war, however, arrived on a text message. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an anonymous number, a simple, terrifying line of text: "CMA meeting scheduled tomorrow, 4 p.m. Closed session. Agenda item 4. B validation of Scholarflex artist contracts." "They're not waiting," I said, my voice hollow. "They're pushing it through. They're going to use the storm as cover. While the city is boarding up its windows, the Coastal Merit Authority is going to meet in secret and rubber-stamp Dre's contracts. They'll legalize what he did to me, to all of us." Silas read the message, his jaw tight. "He's isolating us. The storm wall's off the city, the law wall's off our complaint. He'll walk away clean." "Then we break the axis," Tessa Quinn's voice said. Silas had dialed her on a video call, the laptop now sitting on the table. Tessa looked exhausted, her hair pulled back, a map of the city behind her. "We can't stop their closed-door meeting. We can't fight them in a courtroom we're not invited to." "So what do?" I asked. "We create our own courtroom," Tessa said, her eyes bright. "We use his own weapon against him. The Providence Gate Foundation, his public charter. I've been reading it for the last 2 hours. It's full of self-righteous garbage about corporate ethics and community transparency." "You're going to sue him for being unethical?" I asked, skeptical. "No," Tessa said, a predatory smile touching her lips. "I'm going to use that language and the video from the gala to petition the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau for an emergency public hearing. It's a civilian oversight group. They have no real power, but they have a hell of a broadcast signal. We're going to give them a show." "Dre won't show up," Silas noted. "He doesn't have to," Tessa said. "This isn't for him. It's for the public. It's to force the CMA's hand. If we expose the partnership he bragged about, the CMA won't dare validate those contracts in secret. Elena, you're the star witness. I need your story. 3 minutes, no legal jargon, just the truth." The rest of the afternoon, as the wind began to howl outside, I sat at the heavy wooden table and wrote. I wrote about the scholarship. I wrote about the fear. I wrote about Derek Lorne, the gray suits, and the word on the napkin. When I finished, I gave the pages to Silas. He read them, his face unmoving. He picked up a pen. I braced myself, expecting him to tear it apart, to replace my words with his. He made only 2 changes. He crossed out "I was scared" and wrote "I was silenced." He circled the word "debt" and replaced it with "bondage." He slid the paper back to me. "Your voice," he said, "just louder." Night fell. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. The wind screamed against the lodge, and the rain hit the windows like handfuls of gravel. The power flickered, then died, plunging us into a darkness lit only by the fireplace he had started an hour before. We sat in the near dark, the roar of the world outside a constant, deafening presence. "Why?" I asked, the question pulled from me by the storm's intensity. "That night, at the Edelweiss, you didn't know me. You didn't know anything about it. Why did you stand up?" He looked into the fire, the orange light catching the hard planes of his face. He was silent for a long time. "There is a Valerio code," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the wind. "It is not about morality. It is about order. My family brought order to the ports when the city was chaos, and that order rests on rules. 3 of them." He held up a finger. 1. We do not deal in narcotics. It creates chaos, and it preys on the desperate. It is bad for business. He raised a second finger. 2. We do not harm children, ever. There is no explanation needed for this rule. His eyes finally moved from the fire to me. 3. We do not touch civilians. We do not coerce the vulnerable. We do not profit from the weak who are not in the game. Our business is with men who choose to be in it. He leaned forward, the firelight casting shadows under his eyes. Dre, the Combine. They break that rule. They build their empires on the backs of people like you. They turn civilians into currency. When I saw that word on the napkin, you were no longer just a waitress. You were a civilian under threat in my territory. He was preying on the weak. I stared at him, finally understanding. I had seen him as a cage, another version of Kellen Dre, a man who offered protection in exchange for ownership. I was wrong. Dre's power came from a lie, from twisting laws to create traps. Silas's power came from this code. It was a brutal code, a violent one, but it was just in his world. Justice was the foundation of his power. He was protecting me not because he wanted to possess me, but because I was the proof that his rules meant something. "You are not in the game, Elena," he said, his voice quiet. "He tried to force you into it. He broke the code. That is why this became my business." The hurricane's tail had done the impossible. It had dragged a mass of Arctic air down from the north, and the rain that flooded Mariner's Reach had, in the high altitude of the North Spur Ridge, turned to ice, and then to a thick, blinding snow. The Cedar Line Lodge was no longer a refuge. It was a fortress under siege by the elements. The wind did not howl. It shrieked, a high-pitched, relentless sound that vibrated in the massive logs of the walls. We were snowed in, the power dead, the only light and warmth coming from the roaring fire in the stone hearth. We had spent hours in relative silence, me with my legal pad, him with his encrypted satellite phone, coordinating with Tessa. But now, the phone was silent. The strategies were set. There was nothing to do but wait for the storm, both the one outside and the one in the city, to break. The fire cast the room in a deep, flickering amber. We sat on the thick rug before it, the rest of the lodge lost in cold shadows. I stared at the glass door, watching the snow swirl in a furious, hypnotic dance. My own breath fogged the glass, a small, temporary cloud. Silas sat near me, his shoulder almost, but not quite, touching mine. He was staring into the flames, his face stripped of its usual guarded tension. The firelight exposed the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. He was a man built for constant motion, for command, for solving the next problem. This stillness, this forced isolation, was its own kind of cage for him. His hand was resting on the rug between us. It was a strong hand, the knuckles scarred. The same hand I had seen analyze a legal document and bandage a wound. It was a hand that held power, that held chains, as he had said. I acted before I could analyze it, before fear could veto the impulse. My body felt like it was finally my own. I reached out and laid my hand flat over the back of his. His entire body locked. He did not flinch. He did not pull away. He simply froze. The only sound was the crackle of the pitch pine and the scream of the wind. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, dark and deep in the firelight, met mine. The air was charged, the silence between us louder than the storm. He did not assume. He did not take. "Are you sure?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, quiet, yet it cut through the noise. It was a genuine question. It held no persuasion, no expectation. It was the purest form of respect I had ever been shown. He was giving me the power the control, the final word. He was offering me the very thing Kellen Dre had stolen. I looked at his face, at the man who had stood up for me when I was a stranger, who had listened to my plan, who had corrected my words but not stolen my voice. "Yes," I whispered. I leaned in, and he met me. The first kiss was not a desperate crash. It was slow. It was firm. It was a moment of absolute, grounding certainty. The heat from his lips was a shock against the cold air, chasing the chill from my skin. I tasted the faint, smoky trace of the fire and something else, something metallic and clean, like the storm itself. My heart, which had been hammering with a nervous rhythm, suddenly shifted, finding a new, deep, steady tempo. It felt like coming home. He didn't demand, he didn't conquer. His hand, the one that had been beneath mine, turned, his fingers lacing through mine, a secure, solid grip. His other hand rose, not to my face, not to my hair, but to the back of my neck. His palm was warm, his thumb tracing a small, slow circle at the base of my skull. It was a gesture that anchored me, a gesture of profound protection. My own arms found their way around his shoulders, my fingers gripping the thick wool of his sweater. I closed the last bit of distance, and we stopped, our foreheads touching. We stayed there, our breath mingling, our lungs finding the same rhythm. In and out, together. "I am not," he murmured against my skin, his voice rough. "Good at bonds. Bonds, for me, have always been chains. I have spent my life making sure I am the one holding them, not wearing them." I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead tighter against his. "And I whispered, the admission tasting like ash, have spent my life watching my signature be twisted into a weapon, watching bonds become a cage." He pulled back, just enough to see my face. The firelight was reflected in his eyes. "Then we make a new rule. For this. For us." "Absolute honesty," I said, the words of vow. "No chains," soon he agreed. "No cages." That promise, sealed in the heart of the storm, broke the last defense. He kissed me again, and this time, the heat was there, the slow, confident burn of a promise kept. The careful exploration gave way to a deeper need. It was the warmth of the fire, the warmth of his skin, the warmth of feeling safe. My back found the plush, soft cushions of the hearth rug, the wool a soft scratch against my arms. He moved with me, his weight a solid, reassuring presence over me, holding himself up, never crushing me. His fingers remained locked with mine, our hands pressed together between us. It was a pact. I felt the warmth spread through my chest, a slow, insistent heat that chased away the last lingering chill of the Edelweiss room. He kissed my jaw, his lips tracing a line to my neck, his touch gentle but firm. Every sensation was sharp, clear. The sound of the wind outside the chimney seemed to faint, replaced by the crackling of the logs and the pounding of my own blood. The world, which had been a terrifying, wide-open space, was reduced to this: the smell of wood smoke, the soft wool beneath me, the steady, warm weight of him, the feeling of being, finally, secure. The wind hit the lodge with a sudden, violent gust, a physical blow that rattled the windows in their frames. The fire spat, a bright shower of embers, and then settled. Later, the fire had burned low, to a bed of glowing, ruby coals. The lodge was colder now. I shivered, the blanket having slipped from my shoulders. I felt him move, his warmth leaving me for only a second. The heavy wool blanket was draped over me, tucked securely around my shoulders. I was resting against the cushions, and he was sitting beside me, his back to the fire. He pulled me against his side, enclosing me in his arms, sharing his body heat. I rested my head on his shoulder, the wool of his sweater rough against my cheek. "I don't remember," I started, my voice thick, "ever feeling this." I trailed off, unable to find the word. He didn't ask me to, and we simply tightened his grip, pulling me closer. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the dying hiss of the fire. When he spoke, his voice was a rough whisper, his lips moving against my hair. He spoke 3 words in a language I did not know, but whose meaning I felt in my bones. "Sei al sicuro." You are safe. I woke to a profound silence. The storm was over. The world outside was a pristine, unbroken white, the snow so deep it muffled all sound. A pale gray light filtered into the room. Silas was asleep in the armchair, a blanket pulled over him, his face finally at peace. He had stayed awake, keeping watch while I slept. I felt a strange, buoyant lightness. My keyboard, rescued from my apartment by Milo, sat on the desk. My fingers ached to play. I moved to it, intending to use the headphones, but I stopped. Absolute honesty, I turned the keyboard on, the volume low, but not silent. My fingers found the keys. I did not play the frantic, angry piece from the gala. I did not play the classics. I played what I felt. A new melody emerged, quiet and hesitant at first, like the first light of this gray morning. It was a theme of finding shelter, of trust built in the darkness. It grew in strength, the chords resolving, the melody finding its confidence. It was a declaration. The final note hung in the still, cold air. I heard a chair creak. Silas was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He was not asleep. He had been listening. His hair was undone, falling over his forehead, his face unguarded. He was watching me, and the look in his eyes was something I had never seen. It was not the sharp gaze of an analyst or the cold stare of a boss. It was raw, unshielded pride. The moment was shattered by the harsh, digital buzz of the satellite phone on the table. The connection hissed, but Tessa's voice was sharp, cutting through the peace. "He's moving, the storm broke, and they are scrambling," she said, her voice rapid fire. "The Coastal Merit Authority just moved the hearing. They knew we were on to the closed session. It is now a public review at Meridian Key Hall, effective in 4 hours. They're trying to bury it and ram it through. The fight just went public." Meridian Key Hall was not a place for aristocrats. It was a place for bureaucrats. It was all beige paneling, water-stained ceiling tiles, and the smell of bad coffee and wet wool. The storm had broken, but the city was still dripping, and the hall was packed, suffocatingly hot and loud. Tessa's leak about the hearing had worked better than she'd hoped. The press, smelling blood after the gala, had turned out in force, their cameras jostling for position on the perimeter. I sat with Tessa at a flimsy folding table at the front, facing a raised dais. On it sat the 3-person panel of the Seaboard Compliance Office, the agency Dre used as his legal hammer. They looked miserable, furious at the media presence. The man in the center, a portly official named Harbin, struck his gavel with a hollow thwack. "This is a public review," Harbin announced, his voice straining over the din. "Not a trial. We are here for one purpose, the administrative validation of certain contracts held by the Scholarflex Registry. This is a procedural matter. I will ask the press to remain orderly." Kellen Dre was in the front row, flanked by 2 men in suits that cost more than my car, and he was not smiling. He looked like a man who had been forced to attend a PTA meeting. His lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Calloway, went first. "Members of the panel," Calloway said, his voice smooth and condescending, "this is, as you noted, a simple validation. My client, through the North Atlantic Cultural Council, generously funded the education of numerous individuals." He hefted an enormous phone book-thick document and dropped it onto the table with a theatrical thud. "This is the contract, signed, witnessed, legal. One of these individuals, Elena Miles, has unfortunately defaulted on her agreed-upon repayment terms. Scholarflex, as is its right, began default proceedings. That is all." He painted a picture of a flighty, ungrateful student who had taken the money and run, breaching a generous agreement. Harbin, the moderator, nodded along, his expression eager. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," Harbin said, clearly intending to wrap this up. The contract seems quite clear. If there are no substantive objections—" "There is a substantive objection." Tessa's voice cut through the room, clear and cold as ice. She stood. "The Seaboard Compliance Office has a duty to review not just the contract, but the conditions of the contract. We call Elena Miles." A murmur went through the crowd. Harbin looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "Very well. 5 minutes, Miss Quinn." I walked to the public podium. The microphone feedback shrieked. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. I looked at Tessa, who gave me one sharp nod. Then I looked out, past the cameras, at the packed, curious faces. "My name is Elena Miles. I am a pianist," I began, my voice shaking. I gripped the sides of the podium. 2 years ago, I received a scholarship from the North Atlantic Cultural Council. I was told, to fund my education. Last week, I learned that scholarship was bondage. I told them everything: the fine print, the impossible terms, the activation of the VIP servicing clause. I was at my job, at the Edelweiss room, when my manager presented me with an addendum. It required me to provide personal engagement to donors from the Gray Harbor Combine. He told me I was an asset, that I was collateral. I paused, my throat closing. I thought of Silas's words. "Your voice, just louder." I had no one to turn to. I had no legal recourse. They owned my degree, my future, my body. So in the middle of a crowded restaurant, I did the only thing I could think of. I took a linen napkin, and I wrote one word: H-E-L-P. The room went completely, utterly silent. The only sound was the click, click, click of cameras. Harbin's face was white. "I was lucky," I said, my voice finally steady. "Someone saw it. Someone helped me. But my voice was gone. My signature had been turned into a weapon to silence me. This isn't a default. This is coercion. This isn't a contract. It's a cage." I finished. I had 180 seconds. I used every one. I walked back to my seat, my legs like water. Before Harbin could speak, before Calloway could object, Tessa was at the podium. She was not emotional. She was a surgeon. "Thank you, Miss Miles," she said. "Mr. Harbin, we are not here today to debate the ambiguous language in that 1,000-page document. We are here to debate the architect of that document, Mr. Kellen Dre." Dre sat up, his face darkening. "Mr. Dre is known to us all as a great philanthropist," Tessa continued, her voice dripping with irony. "The head of the Providence Gate Foundation. I have here a copy of that foundation's founding charter, filed with the city." She held up a glossy booklet. "I want to read you all Article 4, Section 2. The Providence Gate Foundation is fundamentally opposed to all forms of forced labor, coercion, or the exploitation of vulnerable populations. A noble sentiment. One I'm sure, Mr. Dre stands by." She turned, her eyes locking on Dre. "Mr. Dre, how do you reconcile that charter with this?" She nodded to the back of the room. Milo, dressed in a borrowed technician's polo shirt, hit a key on a laptop. The large monitors in the hall, previously showing the meeting's agenda, flickered to life. It was the video from the gala. Dre's voice, amplified, filled the hall. "We call it a public-private partnership, a mechanism for ensuring our investments. The Coastal Authority provides the structure." The room exploded. Shouts, gasps. Harbin was pounding his gavel, his face crimson. "Turn that off. This is not an evidence hall." Dre was on his feet, screaming, "This is illegal. This is inadmissible. That is stolen footage." Calloway, his lawyer, was at the podium in an instant, shoving Tessa aside. "This is a circus. This entire hearing has been manipulated by criminal elements," he roared. "My client is the victim of a targeted campaign by organized crime. This woman," he pointed at me, "is not a victim. She is a pawn. She is a confederate. Being used to settle a score, this entire proceeding is tainted. This evidence is fruit of the poisonous tree." The accusation hung in the air. Organized crime. He had said it. He had drawn the line. And in that moment, I understood Silas's absence. If he had been here, he would have proven Calloway's point. He would have been the shadow that tainted my story. But he wasn't. The stage was clean. It was just me, a lawyer, and the truth. "Order, order," Harbin yelled, his voice cracking. "If there is no further legitimate testimony—" "She is not the only one." The voice came from the back. A young man stood up, his face pale but resolute. "My name is Sam Keel. I'm a violinist. Scholarflex has me interning as a concierge at the Crown of Astor, 12-hour shifts. No pay. They call it donor relations." "I'm a painter." A young woman stood, tears streaming down her face. "They have me doing private viewings for donors, at their homes, at night." Suddenly, they were all standing, a dozen, then 24, then 50 young people, all packed into the hall. Artists, musicians, dancers, all trapped, all silent until this moment. The media went into a frenzy, cameras swinging, reporters shouting questions. The panel was in open panic. Harbin looked at Dre, then at the standing crowd, then at the cameras. He was trapped. He conferred frantically with the other 2 members, a hurried, terrified whisper. He slammed his gavel, the sound lost in the noise. "Order, order, given the unexpected volume of testimony, the Seaboard Compliance Office hereby suspends the validation review of all Scholarflex registry contracts, pending a full internal investigation. This hearing is adjourned." It was a win. We had stopped the validation. Reporters swarmed us, a wall of microphones and lights. Tessa was brilliant, fielding questions, citing legal precedent. Milo appeared at my elbow, a solid, immovable object. "This way," he muttered, guiding me through the chaos toward a side exit. "We almost made it." Dre cut us off. His polished veneer was gone. His face was a knot of pure, unfiltered hatred. "You," he snarled, jabbing a finger at my face. Security guards were trying to pull him back, but his eyes were locked on me, blazing. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper that only I could hear. "You think you won? You just destroyed my reputation. You just cost me millions." "I told the truth," I said, my voice shaking. "That contract is ironclad," he hissed. "This circus changes nothing. I will collect, and I will collect every cent of interest and all the principal. I will take it out of your skin." "That's enough," Milo said, his hand landing on Dre's chest, shoving him back 2 full steps. We were through the door, out into the weak, watery sunlight of the post-storm afternoon. We got into the black sedan. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't buckle my seatbelt. Milo's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, his face grim. He hung up as he pulled into traffic. "That was Argo's cell, he said. "Dre is running. The Combine is pulling out. They're liquidating. They're moving their entire server array, all the accounting, all the proof, the original contracts onto a decommissioned casino boat at Halcyon Pier, the Queen of Halcyon." He looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes hard. "They're not just running. They're planning to scuttle the boat and sink the evidence. The next fight isn't in a courtroom. It's on the water." Halcyon Pier was a rusting boneyard, a place where ships came to die. The fog, thick and oily from the post-hurricane calm, smothered the remaining lights of Mariner's Reach. It was a perfect shroud. At the end of the longest dock sat the Queen of Halcyon, a 300-foot decommissioned casino boat, its paint peeling in long strips, its lights dead. It was a dark, bloated corpse, and inside it, Kellen Dre was preparing to bury his digital heart. The Combine was moving its entire accounting mainframe onto the boat. The plan was as brutal as it was simple: sail it 3 miles out into the deep channel and scuttle it. The evidence, the ledgers, the contracts, the names of every artist he had enslaved would be lost forever under 100 feet of cold Atlantic silt. "He wants a war," Silas said, his voice a low growl in the new, upgraded command room at the arc light. "He'd love for us to go in with guns. He could claim piracy, paint himself as the victim. We would lose the city." Tessa, her eyes red-rimmed from 36 hours of legal work, shook her head. "So we don't fight him. We don't try to stop the boat. We race him." She tapped a keyboard. The Argo cell has a high-gain receiver. If we can get a transmitter on his server rack, we don't need to steal the hardware. We just need to copy it. We broadcast the entire data dump live, directly to the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau's public server. We make the evidence public property before he can make it history. I looked at the aluminum briefcase from the gala, the software key. You can't just copy it, I said, my voice quiet. The room went silent. Dre's files are layered, thousands of decoys, the real ledgers. The ones with the master contracts are marked with a digital watermark. I know it. I know the symbol. It was on my original conservatory acceptance letter. I met Silas's gaze. You need someone to identify the target files in real time. I'm going with you. The no was on his lips. I saw his jaw tighten, his entire body poised to refuse. You told me, your voice, just louder, I said, standing. This is my signature, Silas. He used it to cage me. I'm going to use it to burn him down. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He looked at me for a long, assessing moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. You will be attached to me. You do not leave my side. Understood. The fog on the water was a physical wall, wet and cold. We weren't in a loud boat. We were in a black, rigid-hulled, inflatable craft with its engines muffled to a low, throaty hum. Milo was at the helm, navigating through the graveyard of buoys and debris. Tessa was a few feet away, her laptop open, monitoring Harborstead patrol frequencies and the MIB's public portal. I was huddled in the center, a comms earpiece in. Silas stood at the bow, a dark, motionless silhouette. He was the Overwatch, scanning the massive, dark hull of the Queen of Halcyon as it loomed out of the fog. He was all business, his focus absolute, but every minute, like clockwork, he would turn his head, his gaze finding me in the dark, a silent, two-word question. You okay? I would nod. He would turn back. We docked without a sound. Hooking onto a lower maintenance gantry, Milo went first, a shadow, followed by me. Silas was right behind me, his hand on my back, a steady, warm pressure. We moved through the service corridors, the air thick with the smell of diesel and mold. The old casino floor was a haunted ballroom of slot machines covered in dusty white sheets. The server room was, appropriately, in the old cashier's cage, a reinforced steel box. Milo disabled the alarm with 2 quick, precise cuts. It was a bank of whirring servers, their green and blue lights blinking in the dark. Argo team is standing by, Tessa's voice whispered in my ear. The transmitter is live. I plugged the software key into the main terminal. I'm in, I whispered. Files and directories flooded the screen. Decoys, hundreds of them, wait. I saw it, a small, stylized N and C, North Atlantic Council. There, ledger_artists_tier 1. That's it. I'm initiating the transfer. Status, Silas murmured, his eyes on the doorway. It's fast, I said. Uploading 10%, 20. Well, look at this. The voice, amplified and slick with false bonhomie, boomed from the casino's PA system. The main lights flashed on, blinding us. Standing on the casino's upper mezzanine, looking down on us, was Derek Lorne, my old manager from the Edelweiss room. He had a 2-way radio in his hand and a smug, proprietary smile on his face. I had a feeling you'd be too smart to let all this just sink. Valerio, Lorne called down. The Combine was very interested in my theory. They've been waiting for you. He was the inside man. He'd been playing both sides, and we had just walked straight into his trap. The main doors to the casino floor burst open. Kellen Dre entered. Not in a tuxedo, but in a tactical vest, flanked by 4 Combine enforcers. He was holding a broadcast-quality streaming camera. Elena, he said, his voice filled with a terrible, gloating pleasure. You cost me my reputation at that ridiculous hearing. Now, you're going to give it back. He shoved the camera at one of his men. You're going to go live. Right now. You are going to tell the good people of Mariner's Reach that you lied, that Silas Valerio kidnapped you, threatened your family, and forced you to perjure yourself. You will apologize, you will recant, and you will restore my good name. And if I don't, I spat, my blood running cold. Then Dre nodded at Silas. And your friends in the boat will be the victims of a tragic scuttling accident. The charges are set, 5 minutes. He pointed the camera at my face. Your move. Silas was tense, his hand near his jacket, but he was outnumbered. He was watching me. I looked at the camera, then at Dre. The passphrase, I said, my voice shaking just enough. For the MIB live feed, I need the passphrase to authenticate the broadcast. Dre's eyes narrowed. He snarled, impatient. It's Providence Gate 770. Now do it. I turned to the terminal, my fingers shaking. Okay. I typed, slowly, deliberately. PROVIDE dash 870. 770? Are you an idiot? He roared. Sorry, I cried, deleting the last 3 characters. It's just long. Okay, PROV. I was stalling. I was buying seconds for the upload. We were at 60%. Dre saw my eyes flick to the progress bar. He lunged for me, but Silas moved. He didn't attack Dre. When he didn't draw a weapon, he exploded from his position, moving away from me toward a heavy industrial power conduit on the far wall. He ripped the panel cover off with a screech of metal. Stop him! Dre screamed. Silas grabbed the main circuit breaker, a massive, grease-covered lever, and with a roar, threw his entire weight into it, pulling it down. The main lights died, plunging the room back into the red glow of the emergency system. But a new sound filled the air, a deafening, high-pitched whir as the server array spun into overdrive. Dre stared in horror. What did you do? Failsafe, Silas said, his voice calm in the red gloom. Casino boats have redundant power. You kill the primary generator. The battery backup kicks in. And on a modern server array, the first protocol of that backup is to preserve all data. It dumps the entire drive to a secure, off-site cloud. I've got it, Tessa's voice screamed in my ear. He did it. The failsafe is uploading the entire core Argo. Broadcast it all, now. The emergency monitors above the cashier's cage flickered to life. But it wasn't a security feed. It was the footage from the gala. It was Dre's voice, boasting about his public-private partnership. Then it cut to his threat backstage. Then it cut to my testimony at the hearing. Our team was splicing it together, in real time, and feeding it straight to the MIB. A new alarm blared, this one a piercing, boat-wide siren. Intrusion Harborstead Patrol detected. Tessa. Silas's voice was a low command. You called them. We sent them the live link 2 minutes ago, she confirmed. They are 1 minute out. Dre looked at the screens, at the feed of his own confession playing out. He looked at me, his face a mask of pure, primal hatred. He was done. He shoved Lorne out of the way and made a desperate sprint for a side door leading to the aft deck. Boss, he's getting to a speedboat, Milo said, moving to intercept. Let him go, Silas commanded. He didn't chase, and he didn't even watch. He crossed the room in 3 strides, coming straight to me as I stood frozen by the terminal. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed his heavy wool coat from where he'd dropped it, shook it out, and wrapped it tightly around my shoulders, pulling me into his side. He steered me away from the blinking servers, away from the screens, shielding me as the Harborstead Patrol tactical team burst through the main doors, shouting for everyone to get on the ground. We were on the side deck, the cold, wet air hitting my face. The red and blue lights of the patrol boats painted the fog in chaotic, flashing colors. Dre's speedboat was just a fading engine sound, vanishing into the darkness. Silas didn't look at it. He was too busy pulling the collar of his coat tighter around my neck, his hands firm on my shoulders, his eyes locked on mine. He had made his choice. The game was over. He had let the target go to make sure I was safe. The victory was hollow. The Harborstead Patrol had the boat, the servers, and a dozen Combine foot soldiers in custody. But Dre was gone, and Derek Lorne had vanished into the fog with him. We were back at the arc light, the adrenaline fading into a cold, gritty exhaustion. Then the other bomb dropped. Tessa, who'd been scouring the now public MIB data dump, went pale. "Oh, God," she whispered. "What is it?" I asked. "The founding charter," she said, her voice faint. "The original articles of incorporation for the Providence Gate Foundation. I only saw the public-facing bylaws. This is the seed document." She looked at Silas, her eyes filled with something I had never seen her display: pity. There were 2 founding signatories, Kellen Dre and Maud Valerio. The name hit the room like a decompression. Silas, who had been shrugging off his still, damp jacket, froze. "My mother," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Your adoptive mother," Tessa corrected, her lawyer's precision a desperate attempt at control. "She co-founded it with him 15 years ago. It looks like it was a joint venture. His tech money, her family name, a way to wash the Valerio reputation, to build a bridge to the legitimate, political side of Mariner's Reach. A betrayal, not from an enemy, but from the architect of his entire life, the woman who had raised him, who ran the legitimate face of the Valerio empire. She had built her bridge to the elite, and she had built it with Kellen Dre." The main door of the ArcLight opened. Maud Valerio did not enter a room. She conquered it. She was a woman in her late 60s, radiating a power that was colder and sharper than her son's. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe, elegant knot, and her coat probably cost more than my conservatory degree. She was the old, untouchable aristocracy of the city. She ignored Tessa. She ignored me. Her eyes were fixed on Silas. "You have made a catastrophic mess, Silas," she said, her voice not raised, but carrying the weight of a gavel. "You have taken a delicate arrangement, a bridge we have spent 2 decades building to the city's power structure, and you have set it on fire." "His arrangement," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet, "involved the coercion of civilians. He was trafficking young women." "He was an unpleasant necessity," she countered, her composure finally cracking. "He was our access to the council, to the new tech money. You, with your gutter code, you have destroyed that for her." Her gaze finally fell on me. A blast of Arctic cold. It was not hatred, it was dismissal. I was a gnat, a piece of grit in her machine. "A bridge," Silas said, stepping between us, "that is built over the backs of the weak is a bridge of bone. I will not walk on it." "Then you are a fool," she said. "You are your father's son, all muscle and no vision." She left as quickly as she had arrived, a storm of cold fury, leaving a toxic silence in her wake. My world, which had just begun to solidify, fractured again. This was not about Dre. This was about him, about his family, his legacy. "Silas," I said, my voice shaking, "she's your mother. This is your family, your entire structure. If you choose your blood, if you choose that bridge, I understand, but I will walk the rest of this road on my own." He turned to me. The conflict in his eyes was raw, a man being torn in two. He looked at the empire his mother represented, and he looked at me. He put his hands on my shoulders, his grip firm, grounding me. "I choose the code," he said, his voice rough. "And I choose you. There is no other road." The moment was broken by my phone. It was Nora. She sounded terrified. "Elena, I got a text. A formal summons. It's from the Seaboard Compliance Office. They're calling me in as a material associate to your case. Tomorrow morning—" "Oh God, Elena, what do I do?" "They're trying to isolate us," Tessa said, pacing. "They're going after your friends, trying to paint you as an unreliable, criminal-adjacent network. I'm going with her, I said. She's not facing them alone. No, Silas said, his command absolute. You're the primary witness. If they get you in a room, they will bury you in perjury traps. Tessa will go. She will go as Nora's legal counsel. They won't be able to touch her. Tessa nodded, already grabbing her briefcase. The summons says Depot 17, by the old rail yards, 9 in the morning. An off-site summons at a depot. Milo, who had been silent, suddenly spoke, his eyes sharp. He was already at a laptop, pulling up schematics. That's not a hearing. That's a snatch and grab. Depot 17 is an abandoned city storage facility. It's a black site. He typed furiously. Lorne. Derek Lorne. He's still listed as a compliance consultant on the city payroll. He has access keys to that depot. It was a trap. They weren't going to question Nora. They were going to take her. Derek Lorne, bitter and vengeful, was going to use her as a hostage. We split, Silas said, his decision instantaneous. He was back in command. Tessa, you and Elena go to the MIB. Right now. You are holding the data. You will not give it to the police. You will give it to the public. You go live. You present the full, unredacted report. You light a fire so big the city can't ignore it. He turned to Milo. We're going to get Nora. I grabbed his arm. Silas, no. He's using your friend to draw me out, Silas said, his face a mask of cold resolve. I will not let him have her. Go, do your part. I will do mine. Tessa and I were rushed to the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau, an independent news studio that ran on a shoestring budget and a surplus of fury. They gave us a camera, a desk, and a live feed. I was still in my clothes from the Queen of Halcyon, my hair still stiff with sea salt. I sat in front of that camera, the red light glowing, and I told them everything. I told them about the napkin. I told them about the gala. I told them about the right to say no. Kellen Dre did not just steal our money, I said, my voice clear and strong. He stole our signatures. He stole our futures. And he did it with the full cooperation of the city agencies meant to protect us. Behind me, Tessa presented the data, the contracts, the offshore accounts, the names. As we spoke, a live counter in the corner of the screen ticked up. Report co-signers 500, 1000, 5000. Thousands of citizens were digitally adding their names to our testimony. Across town, Depot 17 was a cavern of rusting shelves and shadows. Silas and Milo went in not through the doors, but through a rooftop ventilation shaft. They found Nora tied to a chair in a small, caged-off office. Derek Lorne was there, along with 2 of the Combine's gray-suited men who had evaded the boat raid. She's my insurance, Lorne was saying, his voice echoing in the vast space. Valerio will come for her, and when he does... He's already here, Silas said, dropping from a catwalk behind them. The fight was not a protracted, glorious battle. It was a brutal, efficient, 4-second explosion. It was the sound of Milo moving, a blur of motion, and 2 distinct, heavy thuds. Lorne panicked. He scrambled for his gun and fired wildly. A bright flash in the gloom. The bullet sparked off a metal shelf. Silas hadn't gone for Lorne. He had gone for Nora. He threw his body in front of her, shielding her as the bullet ricocheted. He grunted, a sharp intake of breath as the slug tore a hot line across his shoulder. He didn't pause. Ignoring the flash of pain, he cut Nora's bindings with a single pull of his knife, scooped her up, and was moving, carrying her, plunging back into the maze of shelving before Lorne could fire again. Milo was right behind them, covering their retreat. They were gone before the echoes of the gunshot had even faded. That evening, I was back at the ArcLight, my adrenaline gone, replaced by a hollow, terrifying dread. I was watching the news report of my own testimony when Silas walked in. He was alive. Milo was with him, but his left arm was in a sling, and his shirt was dark with blood at the shoulder. Nora's safe, he said, his voice tight with pain. Milo is taking her to a Valerio clinic to be checked. I rushed to him, my hands hovering over his shoulder, afraid to touch him. You're hurt. It's a graze, he said, dismissing it. I helped him to a chair, my hands finally finding his good arm, my touch trembling. He had taken a bullet for my friend. The front door opened again. It was Maud. This time, she looked defeated. The power was still there, but it was brittle. She walked to our table. She did not speak. She simply opened a small, velvet-covered box and placed it on the dark wood between us. Inside, resting on black silk, was a heavy gold ring, the Valerio signet, the symbol of the family's power. "Him or this," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "Your code or your legacy, the gutter or the family. You cannot have both. Choose Silas." It was the ultimate test, his entire life, his name, his power, all of it contained in that small circle of gold. Silas looked at the ring. He looked at his mother, her face a mask of desperate, powerful love. Then he looked at me, at my hand still resting on his wounded arm. He reached out with his good hand. He did not touch the ring. He slowly, deliberately, closed the lid of the velvet box and slid it back across the polished table until it touched her hand. "I choose," he said, his voice raw, "to burn the wrong bridge." Maud Valerio's face crumpled. It was not anger. Now, it was grief. She had lost. She stood, took the box, and walked out of the arc light. She did not look back. But as she left, I saw the look in her eyes. It was the look of a queen who had just been checkmated, but who was still preparing, from the shadows, to make one last, devastating move. The endgame was not played in a boardroom. It was played on the rusting, skeletal remains of the Queen of Halcyon. The boat had been impounded by the Harborstead Patrol, towed back to the dock at Halcyon Pier, and was slated for disassembly. It was a graveyard, smelling of rust and dead water. Maud's message was delivered by a courier, not a summons, but an invitation, a final negotiation. It read, "Top deck, midnight." Silas read it, his face grim. "She's not negotiating," he said. "She's setting a stage." "You're not going alone," I said. "This is family business, Elena. My mess to clean." "Your mess is my life," I retorted. "I'm not asking." He didn't have time to argue. When he left with Milo, clearly intending to lock me at the arc light, I let him. I waited 5 minutes. Then I took the climbing gear Milo kept in the trunk of his car and headed for the pier. I didn't board by the gangplank. I went up the side, hand over hand on a thick, cold anchor chain, my fingers raw, my feet finding purchase on the rusted hull. I emerged onto the sprawling, wind-blasted deck like a ghost. Silas was there, his wounded arm held stiffly at his side. Maud stood opposite him, a queen surveying her broken kingdom. The deck was lit by 2 harsh, yellow work lights casting long, dramatic shadows. It was a political masterpiece. "Silas," Maud was saying, her voice thin in the wind, "the Providence Gate Foundation was my bridge. It connected our name to every judge, every councilman, every center of power in this city. Dre was a toll. He was trafficking people. Mother," Silas's voice was dead. "I didn't know the details," she snapped, her control breaking. "I knew he was leverage. I knew he got results. I chose not to look too closely at the cost because the prize legitimacy, a true seat at the table, was worth it. You with your father's simplistic codes. You have undone 20 years of work for a piano tutor. And we're here to document that confession." The voice was Kellen Dre's. He stepped out from behind a stack of life rafts, and he was not alone. Derek Lorne was with him, and Dre was holding a camera. He was manic, his eyes wild. "The Valerio Civil War," Dre announced, his voice giddy. "We're going to get it all. Maud admitting to the scheme, Silas admitting to his criminal ties. We're going to get it all on tape, and when the Harborstead Patrol finds you both in the wreckage—" Lorne held up a small, gray block with a wire, a small explosive charge. "A tragic accident," Dre smiled, "caused by Valerio infighting." He raised a small detonator. A small blast first, just enough to disable the lights and the gangplank, to set the scene. He pressed the button. The explosion was small, but sharp. A bright flash, a pop, and the sound of the main work lights shattering. The deck was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The only sound was the wind and the creak of the dying ship. I felt an arm wrap around my waist, yanking me down, shielding me with a hard body as shards of glass rained down. It was Silas. I heard him grunt in pain as he landed on his wounded shoulder. Then I heard a loud click and a burst of static that cut through the wind. "This is Silas Valerio." His voice boomed, amplified, rolling across the dark water. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a bullhorn. He wasn't speaking to Dre. He was speaking to the city. "I am the head of the Valerio Syndicate," his voice declared, echoing off the pier. "My business has rules. Kellen Dre, and those who enabled him, broke those rules. They preyed on the innocent. They used the weak as currency. I am calling on the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau to witness my oath. The Valerio name will no longer be used to provide cover for men like him. As of this moment, that bridge is burned. The arrangement is broken." It was a public confession, a public abdication, a public declaration of war. Dre was screaming in the darkness, "Find him! Shut him up!" Then the red emergency lights on the bulkhead flickered on, bathing the deck in a hellish, crimson glow. They were everywhere, your Harborstead patrol officers, in full tactical gear, swarming up the gangplank that Milo clearly had just secured, and at the front, Tessa Quinn, holding a court order. "Secure the scene," she commanded. "This vessel and all its contents are evidence in a civil investigation. All data is to be preserved." Maud was standing alone, trembling, her face a mask of disbelief. She saw Silas, who had just helped me to my feet. She stumbled toward him, her hand outstretched. "Silas," she pleaded, "the family, the name, my boy, don't throw it all away." She was trying to pull him back into the world of shadows. I stepped forward, my hands shaking. "Maud," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the red light. "We all have a word, a moment. Mine was help on a napkin. It was a plea in the dark. We all have one. Today. We choose. Do we read the word, or do we tear it up?" She looked at my face, then at her son's, his arm bloody, his stance defiant. She saw the new world he was building. Her hand, clutching at his jacket, went limp. She let him go. "No!" Dre shrieked. He was cornered, his trap in ruins. He raised the real detonator, the one wired to the boat's structural charges. "If I can't have this city, I'll burn it. I'll sink this entire pier." He jabbed the button. Nothing. Silas wasn't watching him. He was at the main bulkhead. He threw his good shoulder against a massive red lever. The fire suppression system. There was a deafening hiss. Not water, foam, torrents of it, thick and white, erupting from nozzles all over the deck. It covered the detonators, shorting them out instantly. It covered the ground, making the deck a slick, white sea. Dre scrambled, his feet slipping, his face a mask of terror. He fell, tumbling into the rising foam, just as 3 patrol officers tackled him, burying him in a white, suffocating cloud. The aftermath was quiet, punctuated by sirens. Maud sat on a crate, wrapped in a blanket, signing a full, unconditional withdrawal from every foundation, accepting the MIB's investigation. Silas stood at the rail, watching the dawn break over his city. He had made the call. The syndicate was officially, publicly, severing all ties with its reputation-laundering arms. He announced the formation of a new entity, the Blue Wave Fund, a legal defense foundation for laborers, artists, and anyone else trapped in coercive contracts, funded by 10% of Valerio shipping profits. I walked to him. The foam was still thick on the deck. I could see the blood-soaked bandage on his shoulder. I put my hand on his chest, on his heart. "I choose us," I said, my voice raw from the cold. "I choose this. If you keep your promise, not just to me, to this city." He covered my hand with his eyes, vigilant and sharp, were finally completely warm. The promise is kept. The Coastal Merit Authority was disbanded 6 weeks later. The Seaboard Compliance Office was put under state receivership. The MIB's report on the Scholarflex case became a required text at the city's law school. At the ArcLight, Nora started a free dance program for at-risk kids, the studio funded by the Blue Wave. And I went on tour. I played at concert halls across the country. I played my own compositions. The tour was called Help a Sweet in Rain. All proceeds went to the fund. We ended up back where it began, the Edelweiss room. It was brighter. Somehow, I was a guest this time, sitting with Nora. I watched a new waitress, barely 20, her hands shaking as she fumbled a napkin. She looked terrified of the manager. I caught her eye. I smiled, I reached over, gently turned the napkin right side up for her, and just held her gaze for a moment. "You are safe." She smiled back, a small, sudden rush of relief. Across the room, at table 12, Silas Valerio looked up from his meeting. His eyes met mine. He nodded. Once. The vigilance was still there. It would always be, but the coldness was gone. He was still a guardian. But now, he was ours. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us some extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.